think you should.
Welcome to this week's episode of Whoscussion. We are hosts from Whānau, That Random Guy, and the audible sensual skeleton, Harriet Skelly.
Audible sensual skeleton reporting for duty.
For part A this week, we're going to be doing Time in the Rani and Paradise Towers. Whew. And for part B, we're going to be doing No More Lies, which is an 8th Doctor story with Lucy Bleeden-Miller, and Neptune, which is it's a 3rd Doctor short trip. Time in the Rani. So I'm going to be taking us away this week with Time in the Rani. It starts off with the BBC trying to explain how they fired Colin Baker. I mean the 7th Doctor regenerating, the 6th Doctor regenerating to 7, because of an attack that's taken place on his TARDIS. Now his TARDIS defenses have been explained as why they were down, because he and Mel just finished taking on the Valeyard. Of course, this isn't explained on screen and had to be fixed by our friends at Big Finish many, many years later. In fact, 20 years later. On screen, all we see is an effect on the Doctor's face that's used to blur the fact that Sylvester McCoy is wearing a Colin Baker wig.
Because he did not want to come back.
No, of course not. Yeah, no, I mean, like, BBC didn't handle it. It wasn't J&T's call. I mean, J&T literally was like, Colin, I hired Colin specifically to be the Doctor. And BBC like, yeah, but no. So this season is very BBC controlled, and you can tell straight from the get-go. There's a lot of restraint. There's a lot of, I don't think these people have ever seen Who before going on.
Pretty much, actually.
But getting back to the story here, the 6th Doctor's regenerated. Presumably his skull or it was cracked, or maybe his neck was snapped against the TARDIS console. We'll never know. But the Rani walks in, says, "Bring the guy, leave the girl," which I mean, like, she's kind of asking to be thwarted by, like, leaving Mel alive. Like, I would have been like, kill Mel and then take the Doctor, but hey, you know, J&T wasn't allowed to handle this, and you can tell so much of this doesn't feel like he was involved a heck of a lot. It doesn't have the same feeling as the past 6 seasons. So it's, I don't know, it's very awkward and very teething pains. The Doctor wakes up and he's like, "Who am I? Who are you?" And he decides to be a clown. And I'm not talking about clown like in the sense of Patrick Troughton, where Patrick Troughton was like pretending to be a buffoon before he stopped you from existing. This is like proper comedic acting, and it's clearly not McCoy's choice. Like, McCoy is a funny person. I've met him a few times in real life. Not throwing names out there, guys. That just happens to have happened, and I can thankfully blame my wife for that. He kind of gave a lot of that sort of comedic aspect to the role, but I don't think that's the Doctor he wanted to play, because there's moments in this where the next season's version of 7, it shows the sort of malice of the 7th Doctor. The Rani uses an amnesiac device to make the Doctor forget that she's the Rani. And he thinks she's Mel. She dresses like Mel, and Kate O'Mara's got a wonderful double act in this. Her performance is fantastic, and she even puts on Bonnie Langford's voice. At first I thought it was Bonnie Langford dubbing her, but it really is Kate O'Mara impersonating Bonnie Langford. It's a wonderful bit of acting, and helps the story feel a lot less shallow than it actually is. Of course, the 7th Doctor is being manipulated, which is funny because the next season, the season after, and Big Finish 7th Doctor would definitely pick up on this little life skill of manipulation. Is being manipulated into helping the Rani finish a device. Throughout the story, the Doctor seems to put 2 and 2 together, figures out that the Rani is actually the Rani and not Mel, and is like, there's a strange matter asteroid coming our way. And apparently the Rani is going to turn the planet of Lacertia into a time manipulator. So basically she wants to be Rassilon reborn, which is interesting because I feel like this Rani and Mark of the Rani aren't the same person, and maybe it would have made more sense to maybe have a different actress come in and be a new incarnation of
regeneration.
Yeah, because the way she acts in this doesn't reflect the Mark of the Rani. She's draining the intellect of geniuses from different planets and different eras of time. She's kidnapped Albert Einstein, who would later on have an adventure with the 11th Doctor, an on-screen adventure as well, and As Good as Gold, I think it's called. It's a short trip. That's one thing I've got to give Moffat, and like, even though we bash him sometimes in the show, slashed all the time, he does do on-screen short trips, and it's definitely something he's picked up from Big Finish. So I do like that, the on-screen short trips, especially with the actual actors coming back. But yeah, so the Rani's using this intellect to create this really cool practical effects brain. And
yes.
it looks,
she makes this really cool practical effect.
Yeah, she really does. And this practical effect looks so much more believable and, for lack of a better term, real than the shitty CGI brain we got in Planet of the Ood. Which, again, I like that story. I do like that story, but like, practical effects they work. You know, they just work. It's like, you know, a lot of great special effects driven movies rely still on practical effects, and I think you'll see that a lot with the modern Star Wars films, because they knew what CGI did to the prequels. We're getting back to Who. It's hard to stay involved with this story because, to be honest, nothing really seems to happen. And Pip and Jane Baker, the writers of this story, I don't think they saw Mel from the last two serials of last season, because Mel in this is odd. In the first two episodes, she's a shrill, shrieky girl, which is like the stereotype of the companion people who haven't watched Doctor Who think Doctor Who companions are like.
Yeah.
And it's so odd because Mel was crucial in the last two stories for 6 on screen. She helps the Doctor come to conclusions and figure out the crime, and is very much a part of an investigator on almost equal footing as the Doctor. She might not have as strong a scientific background, but she still nevertheless is an integral part of moving the plot forward. But in this, she becomes a damsel in distress, which doesn't make any sense for me because A, she's very athletic, B, she's shown to be quite strong, both mentally and physically, and C, did they know that writing a woman like this doesn't fly in the 80s?
Yeah.
Like, they made her useless. And in episodes 3 and 4 of the story, where she joins up with the Doctor, she turns back into the Mel we knew from the last two serials. She helps the Doctor. She bounces ideas off. She's in an echo chamber for the Doctor's ego. She's like, hey, do you think this? And the Doctor's like, that's a good point, Mel. I think now B instead of A. And she helps to progress the story forward. And then the Rani becomes a background character for the last 2 parts. It's such a peculiar story, and I can understand why this season got smashed and Doctor Who never recovered, which is unfortunate because I love the next 2 seasons after this, especially since we've already done the Silver Nemesis and we know how brutal Doctor Who gets for its last 2 years. And this is just strange. You can see the BBC have put in some really, really strict rules. They've forced Colin Baker to leave the show, which is so rude because Colin gave the Doctor, I mean, I'm not saying Sylvester didn't, but Colin really was giving 110%. You know, he was trying to make Doctor Who survive the rating slump it was in, and then BBC's put it in a worse position. The story ends with the Doctor out Time Lording the Rani. The Rani decides to leave, and the Doctor's done what the Doctor does when he comes up against Time Lords leaving their TARDISes around. He mucks around with it,
yeah.
Which we've seen since the first Doctor and the Monk. Oh, that's still my favorite moment, is when the Doctor takes away his ability to dematerialize, and he has to wait hundreds of years for the microchip to be invented. That's so great. Well done. I still think that's the best time the Doctor's ever screwed over a fellow Gallifreyan. And yeah, the story, I feel like the only characters that were like actually intriguing were the Lacurtians themselves. I quite like that some of them had just given into the Rani taking over their planet because she had basically given them an infinite drug den for free.
Yeah, a full-on opium den.
Yeah, and they were like, look, we don't hate the Rani because we're high 24/7. And they're like, well, why don't we fight against it? And like, we could fight against her tyranny, but I just want to get on the level.
I just want to get really high.
Yeah, and when that guy goes and sees his brother, and he's like, brother, let's fight against the people. He's like, oh, this again? Seriously, bro? Just come get high with us. Yeah, man, it's the late 80s. The war on drugs doesn't really kick off until the early 90s, man. Come on.
This is kind of like them starting off with the war on drugs. Basically, it's like, if you're on drugs, you're gonna get messed up.
Yeah, you're gonna get taken over by the Rani. And I mean, there's a lot of early CGI in this story.
Oh yeah.
Some of it worked, and by some I mean about 2%. I quite like the TARDIS at the beginning of the story. It was interesting. It was quite shocking to me actually to see something like this in the 80s, and it led me to investigate when CGI first started taking off. And apparently 1961 was the first ever use of CGI, which blows my mind to think that like over 50 years ago CGI was already like, hey, what can we do in cinema with this? And actually kind of intrigues me that it took them a further 20 years to get it really off the ground and prominently into shows. I also remember the fact that this year, in terms of this season airing of Doctor Who, Star Trek The Next Generation started. Yep. So the Doctor Who is finally going up against against Star Trek, and this really puts Doctor Who in the lurch because BBC's not giving it the money it needs, and Star Trek The Next Generation had money pumped into it.
Yeah.
And I feel like BBC were one of the main people. I can't remember his name now, but he really wanted it off the show off the air because he was like, Star Trek looks better, and he was the guy that was paying Jonathan Nathan Turner the money for the show. So he is fully responsible for it not looking good.
Yeah.
So he could have fixed that. And a lot of this, I think, doesn't just come down to the effects. I think it's the mentality of BBC at the time, and it's the money that BBC was reluctant to give it, even though BBC themselves were like, hey, Star Trek The Next Generation looks awesome. Can Doctor Who look this good? Of course it can. You just need
to give it the money.
You just need to give it the money. And it's the problem that they had ever since day one. Doctor Who was struggling with its £20 back in the beginning and trying to get this show to survive. And I'm actually surprised it did. I'm glad it did, because it would go on to, come back into the modern zeitgeist, even though the modern iteration is not my favorite. It still blows my mind that at the time BBC didn't see the gem they had, but the populace did. I just don't understand the mentality behind this. Time of the Rani is a skip for me, I think, and it's the first time I've ever suggested this. I mean, like, I kind of said it when we watched Frontios, but Frontios still had a saving grace, and I think the last 2 episodes of Frontios make up for the first 2, in my opinion. So I don't know. It's so weak. What are your thoughts, Harry? What are your thoughts on Time of the Rani?
I mean, it was the only real thing that I can say about it positively is that it had fantastic music. Really, that's basically it. I mean, the acting, of course, obviously was fantastic.
Yeah,
I mean, they all did as much as they could to try and fix it up, but it wasn't enough. Basically, the story felt really weak. The aliens felt unnecessary. There was some really good practical effects with the 4-eyed aliens. They had eyes on every side of their head.
Oh yeah, the Rani, the ones that actually love the Rani.
Yeah, those guys were pretty cool. Pretty cool looking, at least. But yeah, the whole rest of the story just felt really bland, unnecessary. Yeah, unnecessary. It could have been. It basically felt like filler for me, honestly. Right,
yeah, definitely. Which is interesting because the idea of filler has still yet to come to fruition at this time. I think this might in fact be the birth of it.
Yeah, there's no arc when it comes to Doctor. So for it to feel like filler in an entire show about filler, it feels really weird. Like it doesn't make sense really. So I don't know.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I hadn't thought of it like that, but now that you've pointed it out to me, I do agree that there is a lot of the trappings of filler that you'd find in things like anime or modern American science fiction fantasy. things like Supernatural and that they have the episodes that are pointless and are really just there to give the actors paychecks.
Pretty much.
And it just feels like it.
They don't. Yeah, a lot of the time, filler is just that they've got this many episodes to fill out, and they haven't got the story to fill it, so they just make an episode of something random. That's basically
the thing. Is though, is that
that's fine.
This is the beginning. This is the beginning of a new season.
It's the first episode. It is probably the weakest regeneration story that there ever had.
Yeah, I agree. I wholeheartedly agree. This is the weakest. And I mean, like, Tom Baker's first ever story was him doing a Frankenstein ripoff with a robot, and that still was more compelling than the Doctor taking on a Time Lord.
Yeah, it doesn't really make sense that he was legitimately taking on a Time Lord, and it was weak. Like, how do you make that weak? I don't understand.
Because like Colin Baker's regeneration story was him taking on a Time Lord as well, but it was like an old friend who had become a con.
Yeah,
and his friend ends up having a redemption arc, and the Doctor's in the situation where he's with a Time Lord who was a friend as well, and he's like, "Oh, back when we were at the academy, we used to be friends." And then that's as far as that goes. I'm like, it's funny because the Twin Dilemma got wrecked by critics at the time, and it's significantly better than Time in the Rani.
Yeah, absolutely.
With that, guys, again, I can't really recommend this, but we'll jump into Paradise Towers. Harriet Skelly, take us away, you bloody Resi.
All right. Oh, man. Okay. So the thing about this one is if the characters had been written better, this would have been a great story, because it's basically a really like tamed down, like basically like taking the most recent Dread movie and making it for little kids. That's basically what happens here. Is there's one big like paradise building, which is kind of like the big building from Dread, and it's filled with gangs and cannibals and Pix. Oh my god, Pix.
Pix, right? Pix is great.
Pix is the saving grace of the story. But other than that,
Pix.
Pix is so good. But yeah, it's basically just like that. There's, except for the bad guy isn't just like a head gang member. The bad guy turns out to be the great architect of the building. I guess that kind of makes sense. Who is also inside the body of the caretakers of the building, who are like, the police of the building. It's a real interesting like concept, and that's where it falls over, basically. Like they had a real good starting idea, and then BBC were like, hey, no violence, none of that stuff.
Yeah.
Basically, like, we're gonna limit you to one kill, and it's when the chief gets blown up, and that's it. But also, I guess Pix also dies at the end of it. But it's like a real like heroic death, so it makes sense.
Yeah. So it's
that's pretty much
the
what they're allowed to
BBC.
do. Yeah, like they didn't show. They had some like showings of like, this is bad stuff happening. Like, people are dying, but like not on screen, off screen deaths. That were all spooky and stuff. But it really just doesn't really tie in well. Like I felt like there's a whole lot of elements to it that just weren't handled very well, and if they just put more effort into them, they would have been fine. So it was really hard to get through, just feeling like there was more that could be done, and they just didn't do it. That's basically what it felt like. Yeah. The main point of the story, though, is the Doctor shows up at this tower, and they're basically like they've separated themselves into these unique groups. Apparently, the rest of humanity's gone off to fight a war, and it's basically just a whole bunch of females left behind, as well as males who are the caretaker class. And there's just a bunch of female gangs running around, and cleaners that are killing due to the architect taking control of. And that's pretty much it, really. Like, there's not much else to it. The Doctor saves everybody. Isn't. The Doctor saves everybody, and that's pretty much.
Yeah. And I love that, like, you weren't simplifying it. That really is it.
It really is it. I mean, there's like this thing about like a pool, but that doesn't really doesn't really have any effect.
Oh yeah, and the pool shows like Mel being like, I'm actually the Mel you remember, when she pulls out that gun and straight up murks that robot.
Yeah. And then there's that fantastic part where like immediately after getting out of the pool from being attacked, she's instantly dry. I mean, like, yeah. I don't want to really focus on the story as a whole. I want to focus on Pex, honestly, because his character has got the best arc I've seen in a long time, and he's just an amazing character in general. Like, he didn't want to go to war, so he stowed away on a ship that was going to this paradise place, and then he just, like, his entire being is everyone else in the tower is just, like, considers him a coward for running away, and then his final thing is Mel throughout the whole story has been telling him to stop being such a whiny baby, basically, and then when he finally, like, has the courage, he uses it to sacrifice himself to save it. Like, he's got the best arc, and he's a really minor character, and he's basically treated like a joke throughout the whole thing. Like, he's comic relief. That really says something about the story, you know?
Yeah, when the comic relief guy is the one that steps up to the plate.
Yeah.
I think this is the first time we see the machinations of the future Seventh Doctor, because he calls upon Pex to become the sacrificial lamb as well.
Yeah, basically.
But he's still like, I'm a comedian for the season because BBC is really digging its nails in.
That's pretty much it,
yeah. Yeah, this story, I don't know, it feels less like filler than Time of the Rani. I thought it was interesting with BBC pulling, getting Jonathan Nathan Turner to pull his punches, still being able to get away with cannibals as characters. Yeah. It's interesting because like we wouldn't have cannibals on screen in the Whoniverse until until Torchwood's Countryside. It was interesting for them to exist in the story. I think it was because they needed something for Mel to do.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where the crazy old ladies come from. Because these ladies, the other Rezzies had, from the look of things, had resided themselves to just eating bakery goods as they got given like flour and the like from the caretakers. But
yeah, well, they also apparently like, what's the word? They were like trapping rats.
Yeah, they were trapping rats. Like, that's great. Like, they're real homely, but like they're eating rats. Because you see, the crazy cannibal ones, they've eaten that like really cool looking practical effect, like alien rat.
Yeah. Well, I think that was actually a person.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I feel like there was that some of the like people disappearing was
those two old ladies.
Yeah, it was just those two old ladies eating people because like they were getting away with it by basically.
Yeah. I like when that other Rezzy turns up and she's like, "Hello there, my dears," and they're like, "Oh my god, it's her!" And they're covering up their food and they're like, "We can see
that's
anything."
Pretty great.
And she's like, "Oh, I'm gonna go now. Looks like you guys are fully eating people. Goodbye."
Yes, we are fully eating.
We actually are. Apparently, the robot cleaners weren't originally meant to be in this story.
Okay.
And I was like, well, then how did the rest of the story play out? So apparently there's the script originally didn't have them, but how would the great architect end up getting all the corpses?
Yeah, well, I'm guessing that that means that the idea was that the people who were eating stuff was just meant to be the disappearances were just supposed to be the
crazy old ladies.
The old lady, but they were supposed to be it. I guess it makes sense, but
Yeah,
it's still weird.
Yeah, I mean, this whole story it's so strange. Like, I know it's the late 80s, and I mean, like, this was the era where like some of the strangest films period were coming out, especially in the area of action. I can see kind of where this lackluster season's coming from, but it's pretty bad. Apparently, though, the season they lost Eric Soward, who was the script editor for the last two.
Okay.
He proper was not happy with what BBC was telling them to do. So him and Colin both left.
Fair.
And it looks like BBC's struggling, and I can only imagine what JNT was going through, man. Like, he's like, I've made this show, people think it's awesome, and you're killing it. And they're like, yeah, but we need to kill it because Mary Woodhouse, she told us to. It's like, you guys watched last season, right? I created a character that was a Time Lord her. Like,
Yeah, you know how much I don't care, right? Like you've seen
it. Yeah, I don't know. I can't recommend either of these stories really. I liked that through sort of the lack of a educational system, the young girls who had become gangs, they had created their own language.
Yeah, that was like a semblance of different words.
Yeah,
as well. Like that was pretty cool. There wasn't like a whole lot of elements in this that would have like added up to a really great story. They just, something happened there.
Yeah, something proper happened there, and I really wish it didn't. But anyway, guys, with that out of the way, we're going to jump into part B. I'm really not looking forward to next week because unfortunately we still have to put up with season 24B. Season 24. Oh, well, imagine if there's a B. Oh my god. But season 24. I suppose with Big Finish's Mel arc, there kind of is, and Mel's fantastic in Big Finish. Just listen to Big Finish's monthly range and skip season 24 and pretend you watched it. Like, seriously. By the way, guys, we'll catch you in the next part.